America loves Canada, so why did Donald Trump pick a fight he couldn't possibly win? This video unpacks the political consequences of targeting a beloved ally and how cultural affinity can outweigh economic doctrine. We're going to explore why tariffs against Canada are uniquely unpopular, what this reveals about Trump's political instincts, and how America's perception of itself is tangled in how it sees its neighbor. Before we get into all of this, though, if I could quickly ask you to like this video, and if you enjoy the content, to subscribe, as it would really help with growing this channel and getting those 50,000 subscribers by Christmas. Now, most trade wars have an obvious villain. Take Donald Trump's earlier trade skirmishes with China. There, it felt very straightforward. A strategic competitor, accusations of unfair practices, geopolitical tension. Tariffs made sense as part of the armor. But when the target is Canada, that's a different story entirely. Because Canada isn't some distant adversary, it's not a checkpoint on the way to a trade war, it's your actual neighbor. It's your vacation memory, your polite counterpart in a hockey rivalry, the friend who borrows sugar and never drains the carton. To slap tariffs on Canada is, metaphorically, to shout at your neighbor for shoveling your driveway too politely. It doesn't compute culturally, politically, or even economically. Here's what I'm seeing. Support for tariffs among Americans has collapsed more dramatically than many realize. A recent poll shows only 31% of Americans view tariffs favorably. In another survey, 58% of adults say tariffs hurt the U.S. economy. On the specific question of Canada, only about 35% of Americans supported new tariffs on Canadian goods in early 2025. So the story isn't just tariffs are unpopular, it's tariffs designed against your friend are deeply unpopular. Because when you pick on Canada, you're not punching a rival, you're punching someone your audience already likes, and that flips the politics dramatically. Canada isn't just another trade partner. In many ways, it's America's mirror, similar enough to recognize itself, but different enough to romanticize. It's the backdrop of US best vacation stories, the butt of the gentlest jokes, the friend who never asks for the Wi-Fi password on the couch. So when Trump escalated tariffs against Canada, another 10%, reportedly triggered by a provincial ad that annoyed him, check out that video if you're interested, the move didn't just seem misguided, it also felt wrong. Like punishing a puppy for fetching your slippers too enthusiastically. Please never punish any dogs or any animals. Politically, the misstep is very obvious. According to polling, favorability for Canada among Americans is very high, but meanwhile, views on Trump in Canada are very low. One survey shows only 34% of Canadians have a favorable opinion of the US and 64% a negative one. Another shows nearly 75% of Canadians view Trump unfavorably. Are you surprised? And yet, in choosing this fight, Trump went after someone more popular than him among Americans and Canadians. That's bold in a sense of strategically unwise. There is a fine line, my friends, between bravery and stupidity. When your opponent is someone everyone already likes, you're forced into the awkward role of the unlikable one. That's the dynamic at play here. Canada is broadly loved in the US. Trump is broadly not liked in Canada and increasingly questioned in the US. So as I watch this unfold, I see a simple pattern. When you ask people to side against someone they already like more than you lose, and you lose fast. By the way, if you're interested in improving your critical thinking skill, the sign up for my upcoming book is in the description. Check it out. I'll be emailing people with a discount when it's out this weekend. So if you're even a little bit curious, now is the time to sign up. If that's not your thing, but you still want to support the channel, you can check me out on Ko-fi. Every contribution helps. Now, tariffs are easy to rationalize in theory. Protect domestic jobs, punish unfair practices, leverage negotiation. In a textbook sense, it really does check out. But in practice, well, real-world economics isn't a clear algorithm. It's messy, it's personal, it's a mix of narrative and emotion. And few policies suffer more when their emotional logic collapses than tariffs do. Think of it this way. They introduced the Trump tariff taxes, not just as a label, but also as a shorthand for what I see happening. The levy scheme launched under Donald Trump and his team carried very lofty promises: revitalize American history, bring jobs back, level the playing field. Check out this other video on Trump's 3 broken promises, unfortunately. In speeches, all of this sounds decisive, but what we've started to see now in the data and in market behavior is almost the reverse. More expensive consumer goods, disrupted supply chains, vexed partners, and especially odd optics when the target isn't the geopolitical foe, but a friendly neighbor. Consider the case of Canada. Canada is America's second largest trading partner and structurally the most similar ally the US has. One headline figure was saying that about 40% of US trade is through 3 big partners, Canada, Mexico, and China. And of those three, only one shares aspects like the electricity grid, closely interlinked supply chains, hockey rivalries, cultural synchrony. Targeting Canada with tariffs is like picking a friendly neighbor and telling them to pay more for a shared driveway. It just does not check out. Now, just a couple of days ago, the US administration reportedly extended a blanket 10% tariff on Canadian goods, allegedly triggered by the Reagan ad from Ontario, which irritated the president. Whether that ad justified it or not wasn't necessarily the point. We actually discussed at length whether the ad worked or not, so check out that video if you're interested. But the move carried the weight of emotion more than strategy. It was less calculated leverage than retaliation dressed as policy. What happened next? Canadians, usually a nice guy bunch in global polls, they visibly shifted. In 2023, only around 7% of Canadians saw the US as a potential threat, but by mid-2025, that figure had jumped to about 48%. That is a massive, massive, massive increase. Meanwhile, in the United States, polling shows Americans rate Canada with a net favorability of something like 49%, whereas the US president net rating in Canada is about minus 58 points. You can't pick a fight with somebody who is more popular than you among both your own people and theirs and expect things to go smoothly. Let's bring in some economics here. A recent piece from the Yale Budget Lab estimated core goods prices in the US are about 1.9% above pre-2025 trend, and durables are about 2.3% above trends as of June. Meanwhile, the Harvard Business School data showed import prices for goods under tariffs appear around plus 5% compared to non-tariffed equivalents. So the claim that tariffs are cost neutral or purely strategic begins to feel hollow when goods in your basket cost more and foreign producers aren't absorbing the hit. Further, according to analysis by Goldman Sachs, US consumers are projected to absorb about 55% of tariff costs by end of 2025. And those implementing the tariffs argued foreign exporters would bear the load. The idea of someone else paying for American tariffs dissolves when you realize that your groceries bill is actually moving. So yes, the economic argument for tariffs remains in the fine print, but in the relational and emotional domain, which in politics is actually everything, targeting an ally like Canada feels mispitched. It's not just trade policy. It becomes a social signal. It tells Americans the neighbor you like is now under suspicion. It tells Canadians, we're no longer your friendly half-brother, we're the rival side of a trade fight. And all that happens while the logic of tariffs is still even being questioned as we dug into it in our earlier video, the one where we ask, are tariffs actually benefiting Americans or are they inflationary? The link is down in the description. In diplomacy, affection is a currency, and Washington seems to be spending it faster than it can be earned. If you ask me, when your relational capital with Canada is that high, wielding tariffs is less about leverage and more about leverage gone sideways. Now, trade policy, like any policy, lives or dies on public perception. It has to make sense, not just on a spreadsheet, but in the story a nation tells itself. And when the logic gets fuzzy or the motive starts to feel personal, public support evaporates very quickly. Trump, of course, has made an art form of turning personal grudges into national policy. A president who lashes out at an entire country, or in this case, a province, over a television ad isn't doing economic strategy. He's acting out a private grievance in public with public consequences. I don't think that's leadership, my friends. That's more theater, and the audience is getting tired. What's worrying here is not just the economic fallout, although don't get me wrong, that matters a huge deal, but it's also the signal that it sends. It's a pattern, a philosophy even, one that seems incapable of distinguishing between power and personal satisfaction, between policy and impulse. I think back to what Congressman Brendan Boyle said when asked about these new tariffs. He said, I'm not going to give an arsonist credit for possibly putting out the fire that he started. It's not just the fire, it's the habit of lighting them in the first place. And that habit of seeing every critique as an insult, every partner as a rival, every transaction as a test of dominance has warped the way the United States engages with the world and with itself. Because the same week Trump claimed to strike a new framework with China, the vaguest of diplomatic fig leaves, by the way, he turned around and escalated a completely avoidable conflict with Canada. It was a revealing moment, a president eager to negotiate with adversaries, but all too willing to antagonize allies. I wonder why. The contradiction has consequences, of course. Canada under Prime Minister Mark Carney has been measured, principled, and surprisingly unflappable in response. Carney is a man with deep roots in both economic policy and international diplomacy. He did not escalate the situation. He did not tweet. He did not bait. He governed. And in doing so, he reminded the world that grown-up leadership still exists on this continent, even if it doesn't always come from Washington. What Canada offered was composure in the face of provocation, and that quiet dignity carried weight because when one side acts out and the other refuses to mirror it, the difference becomes very obvious. Canada looks like the adult in the room, and under Carney, they've doubled down on multilateral trade, on rules-based systems, on diplomacy that doesn't need a headline to be effective. And meanwhile, in Washington, the very same scorched earth mindset has bled into domestic policy. During the same press cycle, a Republican lawmaker publicly referred to Democratic negotiations as terrorists. Seriously? When challenged, he softened it to hostage takers, as if that's any better. But the damage was done. The metaphor made it clear, in this political language, even fellow Americans are treated like enemies. When your negotiating framework mirrors your tariff doctrine, scorched earth, thin skin, maximum insult, it stops being about policy at all. It becomes about posture, about proving dominance for its own sake. And the thing about posture is that it wears thin. Eventually, people start looking for balance, for clarity, for something quieter than revenge. And right now, oddly enough, they're finding it in Ottawa. So what really wins in politics? Economic logic or emotional loyalty? Because here's the thing, logic might win the argument, but emotion wins the room. Trump's tariff war with Canada didn't backfire just because it made stuff more expensive. It backfired because it tried to convince Americans to turn on a country they actually like more than him. It was a story that just didn't land, that Canada was suddenly a threat, that being polite was somehow weak, that trade had to feel like a war. But Americans don't buy that, not when it comes to Canada. And that tells you something. You can pick fights with enemies, you can outmaneuver rivals, but you can't go after a friend, especially a well-liked one, and expect people to cheer you on. Popularity isn't policy, but let's be honest, sometimes it's what makes policy possible. Without the goodwill, tariffs start to feel like taxes, big gestures feel petty, and presidents end up fighting battles no one asked for. Canada, for all its calm and mildness, has drawn a line, and in doing that, they've reminded the US of something easy to forget, that even the nicest people have limits.